I'm going to be honest with you. When I contacted, Parks Canada and asked them for information about Ayuitok, and they sent me this brochure of information, and it was all in negative terms. I was like, nobody comes up here. You got polar bears. You got bad weather. You got to really know what you're doing. There's not a lot of search and rescue. You better have your stuff together. And, I've always been a sucker for that kind of language, for, we dare you to come here.
Hello and welcome to One-Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawastrina. Here each episode, I will chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. We'll hear captivating and sometimes unbelievable travel tales and learn a little bit about the locations where they happen. In this episode, we'll chat with J.R. Harris. JR has been exploring and backpacking long distances for more than 60 years. Consequently, he has been to some of the most remote and inhospitable wilderness areas in the world, unsupported and mostly alone. He loves to solo trek. He's written and spoken about his experiences in a variety of places. In particular, though, he wrote a book, Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. It's actually how I found JR. I stumbled across his book, picked it up, and was absolutely captivated by it, so definitely check it out. He's also on the board of directors of the 120-year-old Explorers Club. He was the subject of a documentary, Born Curious, which you can check out online. And he founded and is president of JRH Marketing Services, which he started in 1975 as a research and insights consulting firm in the US. So he's done a lot. If you want to find out more about JR, check out jrinthewilderness.com. I'm going to link a lot of the things that I mentioned on my website as well. With all that said, JR is here to tell us one of his stories. So JR is going to tell us about his trek across Baffin Island. Baffin Island is in Canada. It's a remote place. It's sort of between Greenland and mainland Canada, predominantly above the Arctic Circle. It's a place where very few people go, let alone Canadians, actually. Being Canadian, I know very few people who've been to Baffin Island as well. It's a bit of an inhospitable place as far as weather goes. There's polar bears, there's some other stuff we'll hear about. He wrote about this in his book, which is how I came across this story, and I remember reading it and literally getting goosebumps at some of the parts, which JR is going to go through today. So I hope you enjoy. Hey, JR.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really interested to do this. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. It's really exciting to have you here to talk through one of your stories, which actually we haven't had a lot of wilderness stories. I don't think we've had any to date. So double excited for that because I think it's a really cool way, a really interesting way to travel and see new places.
Well, I'll back you up on that. I mean, I'm born and raised in New York City, and I spent many years, just over the course of many years traveling in wilderness. So quite a contrast, if I do say so myself. But I love it. Yeah.
I love that juxtaposition about you, I guess, which is, New York, big city, highly populated, never sleeps as everyone hears, and then your travel, which is solo travel out in the wilderness, the biggest expanses, sometimes I'm sure the quietest places. How do you think about that?
Well, it's nice. I feel a sense of balance. I feel as though I'm equally at home in the streets of New York City, where I grew up, as I am, in the middle of nowhere, heading deeper into nowhere, usually by myself. When you kind of merge the two experiences together, uh, it has a very interesting impact on your personality and your lifestyle and
Yeah,
your worldview, etc. So I feel that I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to both of these uh, lifestyles and environments.
definitely. Are you? I usually ask, where are you right now? Are you home?
I'm at home right now. Yes, I'm in New York. I'm a New Yorker. Forget about it.
Where in New York have you moved around your whole life? You've been based in one of the boroughs. Whereabouts?
I live in Queens.
Queens.
I spend most of my time here in Queens, but I've also lived in Manhattan. I lived in actually in Staten Island, which is part of New York City, for a while. But mostly it's out here in Queens.
Nice.
The place that most visitors uh, are probably familiar with because both New York City airports are in Queens. So it's the first place that a New York City visitor, if you fly in, will come into Queens.
For better, for worse, for those airports. But yeah.
Right.
Um, I had to ask. It's just curious to me. Have you found, I've read through your book, Way Out There, um, which I've heard um, has been ranked as a top 50 trekking book. So
Thank you.
congratulations for that. And do you find, do you have that same curiosity exploring New York City? Like, it's not lost on me that you could walk around and find new things around the city every time you go outside.
Totally true. You would think that somebody who's lived here, all his life would know, pretty much everything about the city. But New York is not that kind of town. New York is very vibrant, very dynamic, and what you may see here this week, next week it may be gone, and something next week that's not here now will be out there to attract your attention. I love to move around. I'm the kind of guy, growing up here in New York City, like if I wanted to, let's say, go to a movie at midnight, I need to know that I have my choice of movies. And when the movie is over at 3 in the morning and I feel like I want a little something to eat, I don't want to know that there's a restaurant open. I want my choice of food. And New York is one of those places, one of the few places where you can do that. So I take advantage of the city 24 hours a day. I used to drive a taxi here, a yellow cab, for 2 years in New York City.
Wow.
So, yeah, I'm a New Yorker.
God, I feel you there. I love that. I love that about New York.
Yeah.
You really just can't find something new every time. And I also watched the amazing little documentary about you called Born Curious, and it doesn't surprise me at all that that's what you like to do, and that you like to get out there in the wilderness and explore the world.
Absolutely. I've been a member of the Explorers Club for 31 years, and I'm now sitting on the board of directors for that club. And I'm also chair of the club's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. But most of all, I'm just a long distance explorer, trekker, and I'm driven by curiosity to see what's out there in the world, and especially the natural world. Um, I basically go alone, mostly because there aren't a lot of people in New York City that want to go to a place like Baffin Island or somewhere. So I'm happy to go alone. And I've done it over 60 times. I have more than 60
Wow.
treks that are at least 2 weeks long. And,
Wow.
if anybody wants to just see what they are, I have a website called jrinthewilderness.com. And it's got all the information there and a lot of nice photos as well.
You're offering me a lovely segue, but I do want to ask for the people out there who don't know, can you tell what's the Explorers Club?
So the Explorers Club, as you might guess, is a club for explorers. It's it's been around since 1904.
Yeah.
And the original members were those who were essentially Arctic explorers back in the day. the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. A bunch of wealthy newspaper magnates and
Mm-hmm.
explorers got together and formed a club, a society where they share the adventures that they've had and the things they discovered and so forth. And club's still going strong. New York City is where the headquarters is, and it's got over 30 chapters around the world and about 3,000 members.
Awesome. It's something for me to aspire to
Check it
after
out.
learning about it.
Check it out.
Um, all right. Well, as you know, One Off Travel Stories, this podcast is about, those stories that sort of touched, maybe changed you in a certain way. The long form stories that, the ones that you tell over dinner, maybe at a bar over and over again. So with that, can you give us a little bit of context on the story you're about to tell? What year is it? Where are we going? And why? As most importantly, why are you heading there?
All right, so I'm taking you back to the mid 1980s. All right,
All right.
and we're heading north from New York up into Canada to Baffin Island. Now, Baffin Island is the fifth largest island in the world, although a lot of people never even heard of Baffin Island, at least people that I talked to.
Yeah.
But the island is huge. It's in the eastern part of Canada. And when I went up there, uh, it was part of the Canadian Northwest Territories,
Yeah.
which it no longer is. It's now part of Nunavut, the territory given to the indigenous people living there. But when I was there, it was still part of Northwest Territories. And there is a national park there called Ayuituk, which means the land that never freezes. And back in the day, that was the northernmost national park in all of the Western Hemisphere, in all of North America. And very, very few people go there because it's very, very isolated and expensive to get there. More people go to Yellowstone National Park in one day than go to Ayuituk National Park in a whole year. So you won't see a whole lot of people there on this huge, huge island, which
And,
is very sparsely populated as well. But I wanted to go up there, and there's a trail that goes through this national park that crosses Baffin Island, and I wanted to check it out and apply, my wilderness experience as well as my curiosity to see what it'd be like. And there was one other reason I went there. On either side, on either end of this trail, is a community of local indigenous people, Inuit people mostly. And I'm very interested in people who live in remote areas around the world. That's where most of my expeditions go. And so, apart from or in addition to wanting to hike across this vast island, I wanted to spend some time on either end with the people who live there so I could get a sense of what their culture is like, their traditions, their history, what they eat for breakfast, and things like that.
so it's not just your sense of curiosity and adventure. It sounds like you've got a bit of anthropology in your blood as well.
I do. I have a degree in psychology, and
Gotcha.
compare that with my insatiable curiosity and my love of adventure, and just the notion that you never get too old to learn something, and that experience being the best teacher. I'm probably a pretty good student because I'm still out there trying to pick up some knowledge.
As I guess listeners know, and I'm from Canada, so I know about Baffin Island. I can tell you, I would be surprised if more than 1% of the Canadian population has been up there, because it's way out there. It's
There should be a book called that, Way Out
it's a good name.
There. It is way out.
it's tough to get up there. I think it's still quite difficult to get up there. Not let alone in the 80s. When you when you think about new places to go, take me through your. I know how it happens for me a lot of the times, but did you know about Baffin Island? Were you looking at a map, going, like how did you choose? How do you choose places to visit? I guess is the other than the two things that you told me about visiting new cultures.
Well, for one thing, I'm interested in going any place just because I haven't been there before.
Yeah,
So that would be an attraction. Also, um, because few people go there, because it was the northernmost national park. But you know what? I'm going to be honest with you. When I contacted, Parks Canada and asked them for information about Weetok, and they sent me this brochure of information, and it was all in negative terms. I was like, nobody comes up here. You got polar bears. You got bad weather. You got to really know what you're doing. There's not a lot of search and rescue. You better have your stuff together. And I've always been a sucker for that kind of language. For we dare you to come here. So when I read that, there was like a 10-page brochure or pamphlet about safety from polar bears, and
yeah,
things like that. And I was like, oh, yeah, I got to go there. Now, just so I mean, in terms of context, now, when I did that, I was already an experienced guy. I'd already been out there. I was like in my mid 40s, so I wasn't a
yeah,
kid. I'm 80 years old now, and I'm
yeah,
still trekking. But yeah,
yeah.
back then, but that's what it was. All of this language about don't come here unless you really know what you're doing. You know, that's why I went. I mean, that's one big reason.
I love it. I love it. Well, before I prime you to say to get it, like start the journey here for us, how do you typically prepare? Like, you talked about the cold, obviously the polar bears, which, yeah, that's a real threat. Among all the other things, like, how do you prepare for, or how did you prepare for this trip?
Well, the preparation is the most important part of the trip. Preparation is anticipating everything that you can encounter there and having a response for it before you even leave home. And so it involves doing research and learning what the weather is going to be like, what the conditions are like, uh, what the terrain is like, how long it's going to take to do it, and therefore how much food you should bring, what kind of clothing you should bring.
Right.
I enjoy the planning phase almost as much as I enjoy the actual trip. The trip is really nothing more than the ultimate end of the tracking phase, to see if your planning was sufficient, and if you can come back, ideally with all your body parts. Uh, and so, yeah, that's what I did. It takes for a trip like that. It took me a couple of months because back then,
Wow.
there was no GPS, there was no internet, there was no nothing.
Yeah.
I used to have to put letters in the mail, snail mail up there to get maps, get
Right.
information from the national park. Uh, but I do enjoy the preparation because it stokes my excitement about the trip that's going to come up, and if I plan it right, I feel very confident when I go, even though I'm going alone, that I've anticipated just about everything that could happen. I have a kind of a plan that I can go to in a bad situation, and I'm ready to go.
Nice. That's to that point then. Yeah, take us to Baffin Island.
So now Baffin Island, this trip actually, the theme of it turned out to be about fear,
Mm.
and I had some some thoughts about fear, like everybody else does who goes in the wilderness. But because I wasn't a kid anymore and had been through tough situations, uh, fear doesn't intimidate me, or at least it didn't back then. And
Yeah.
so I took this trip. I left New York City. I flew up to Montreal, spent the night in Montreal. I took a
Hmm.
flight the next day to Iqaluit, which is on Baffin Island, now the capital of Nunavut, and it was called
Hmm.
Frobisher Bay back in the day. And I transferred uh, a plane from Iqaluit, and I flew to this little hamlet called Broughton Island. Broughton Island is a tiny island off the east coast of Baffin Island, but it has a community there also called Broughton Island, and it has an airport there. And from there, you can arrange to get a boat to take you from Broughton Island across the bay to Baffin Island, where the actual trek started.
Hmm.
So I landed in Broughton Island, which now is called Kikitajuak. It's no longer even called Broughton Island. Um,
Yeah.
and and everybody, within 10 minutes of me getting there, everybody in town knew I was there, and everybody in town knew where I was coming from. They don't get a lot of visitors there. Uh,
How big is town, by the way? How many people are we talking?
we're talking about, I think it was 400.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, small town, but you're still, as I
Well, a
said,
small
yeah.
town. I mean, I live here in New York. There's like 400 people in the supermarket, down the corner. So, uh, and the place is full of kids. They're running around. It was in the summer. The sun never goes down, and they'll follow me around everywhere I go. And the people there were very, very curious about me, because they don't get a lot of people from New York City, and everybody wanted to know what it was like. And also because I mean, you can't really see me now, but for those who may be listening, I happen to be African American, and people were curious about that. What's life like? And
Yeah.
but it was mostly about, they were as curious about me as I was about them.
Hmm.
And so, spending a couple of days just hanging out and talking to the locals, it was really fun. Now, there was an issue there where that year the ice that usually uh, fills the bay, the icebergs, they were very slow to melt. And I was there like at the end of August,
Yeah.
almost the end of the summer, and there was still a lot of icebergs there. And they had to arrange for an Inuit family with a boat to take me from Kikitajuak or Brown Island all the way to Baffin Island, avoiding a lot of these icebergs and floating ice pack. Also, because there's ice, there were polar bears there,
Right.
and in fact, while I was there, 3 polar bears had come actually into the town to the garbage dump, and so they were concerned. The people there were concerned about me walking across this huge island where there might be polar bears because of the slow melting of the ice.
Yeah, I bet.
So what they wanted to do was to have a guy accompany me for the first, once I got to Baffin Island, to accompany me for the first day. This guy would be armed, and have a shotgun or some kind of weapon,
Hmm.
because they were telling me that with polar bears, their favorite food is seal, and they would rather stay near the coast where they could find a seal. Sort of the thought was that if I could get within 10 or 15 miles of the coast, if I can get that far inland, then the notion of a polar bear encounter would be very unlikely.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I didn't have the money to pay for this guy to walk with me,
Right.
and then he'd have to send a boat to pick him up the next day, and I'd have to pay for that. So I said, nah, just drop me off on Baffin Island on the coast, and I'll walk it from there on my own. But it,
You
it
mentioned,
was it was interesting.
I was gonna say, you mentioned fear at the beginning. Like, looking back, I mean, in hindsight, does that seem foolhardy, or you had been on enough treks, you kind of had a feel, I guess, for the wilderness, the animals, the behavior, that you were confident? Where does that land?
So it's one thing to be fearful, and fear can actually be a positive, if you're willing to learn from it. Now, uh, back in the day, then I had my share of tough situations, uh, and I wasn't really that intimidated by fear. I had a healthy respect for it,
Yeah,
uh, but I wasn't afraid to be afraid. And so I started out. I was totally willing to walk by myself, even though there was some concern, because they were like, "Man, but you're from New York City. You're going to be up here with all these polar bears." I was good with that. I believe that there are different types of fear. I've given fear a lot of thought. There are things you can learn from fear, et cetera, et cetera. Although, of course, the bottom line is nobody likes to be afraid,
yeah,
including me. All things considered, I'd rather not be afraid. So on this trip, though, I'm starting out, and I was feeling the fear. I started walking inland, and it seemed like every 100 meters, I would turn around and look behind me just to make sure that I wasn't being stalked by a bear. I was unarmed except for a can of bear spray,
okay,
and I didn't really give me a lot of self confidence, in terms of defending myself while I was in an attack, because I didn't think that the spray was going to do much good.
yeah,
But that's what I had, and so I started walking, turning around again, every 2 minutes, and wondering, what would happen if I saw a bear, because there was nothing I could really do. A polar bear, unlike a grizzly bear or a black bear or a brown bear, a polar bear is really the only bear that will purposely stalk the person.
yeah,
I've seen grizzlies dozens of times. They're mostly running away when you see them. But a polar bear is different, and I knew that. And so I'm walking, and they had these little shelter huts for the rangers, park rangers, to stay in when they're making their patrol across the island.
yeah,
And because it was so late in the summer, and I was told that I would be the last person trying to walk across, and that I was probably not going to see anybody else the entire distance, which is like 60 miles. Um, that I should I should stay in the shelter when I get there, because there's a two-way radio, and I should try to contact park officials at every one of these shelters, so they would know how my progress was going. They would be able to check and see how far I was getting. None of them worked. So, and then I quickly learned, that it wasn't just about polar bears. On my second day in, as I was walking through the valley, um, I stepped in a patch of quicksand.
oh wow,
Now, I had heard of quicksand. I had never seen it. I didn't know anything about it except what I saw in the movies. But yeah, I stuck my foot in, and when I tried to pick it up, it just kind of sucked it down. And I was going, "What's going on here?" And I should have known, because when I looked around, there were no rocks there. It was just like a flat area, which I thought was just kind of muddy.
yeah,
But it's tough walking up there, and this would have been a lot easier because it was flat. And I just started walking across, and then I got stuck in both feet.
ooh,
Uh, Luckily, it was right at the beginning there, and I turned around and I lunged back to where I had come from, and I was able to get on solid soil. And then I rolled out and I got back out. So the whole thing took, half a minute or so. But now my heart is pounding. I'm like, oh my God, it's you have to watch where you're going, and realizing that your whole life can change in a matter of seconds, and that it wasn't just polar bears and
Yeah.
bad weather and other things that I had to look out for. I had to keep, uh, I had to stay in the present tense and maintain my vigilance because there's a lot that can happen out here, and that caused me to realize it. So
Yeah, it's not, you can't be hyper focused on polar bears. You got lots of other stuff you need to deal with too.
yeah, absolutely, and the weather turned crazy with cold and snow and winds, which I was expecting from the Arctic, even though it was still in the summertime. Um, but then a couple of days later came, kind of the ultimate uh, test or trial, of getting through on this route.
Because the weather and the polar bears and the quicksand wasn't enough, eh?
Wasn't enough, and now the whole trip was, like I think it was 8 days, 8 or 9 days,
Okay.
and by the fourth or fifth day, I'm figuring, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
I'm used to it now. I'm trail tough, is what I call it. I'm trail tough. I'm used to hiking. I'm used to bad weather. I'm used to being wet and tired and so forth and so on. Everything is cool.
Yeah.
And and then I got to this place where I need to continue going across it. There's a river there called there's a lake there called Summit Lake,
Okay.
and Summit Lake empties out into a river that flows to the coast.
Yeah.
And I was walking along the southern end of that lake, but then at the end, where the outflow of the lake is through a gorge,
Yeah.
and I had to cross to the other side. And the situation was this: there was a rusty cable connecting one side to the other, and attached to the cable was a pulley,
Okay.
and attached to the pulley was a chair, a rickety wooden slat thing. I don't know how long it'd been there. The cable was rusted out. It was like an inch thick. And the whole thing was swaying in this wind, and the roaring water rushing through the gorge. And I was like, wait a minute, man. What
I'm
is going
picturing
on
like
here?
a DIY gorge crossing here. That's what it sounds like.
I mean, I knew from the map that I had to get across, and
Yeah.
I knew from my planning that there was a chair there. I had no idea it was going to be like this rickety old, I don't know when the last person was that even tried to get across this thing.
How big is this gorge? How big are we talking?
I'm going to say like 50 feet across,
Okay.
and maybe as deep or a little bit deeper. But it was cloudy, and it had been snowing. I couldn't really see the water. I could certainly hear it,
Yeah.
and I could barely see the other side of the gorge. I could see a cable going out into the fog.
Yeah.
I knew from a map where it was going, but I couldn't really see it, and I
Yeah.
was scared. And I was really scared. And I said, "Oh man, this is different. This is something now." Understand, there's no way to turn around and go back.
Yeah. I was gonna say you're like 5, 6 days in.
I have to go this way. There was nobody there. And, the irony of this is that had it been not just me, even if it had been one other person, then getting across this chairlift thing might not have been so bad. Because what you would do is one guy would get in the chair, haul himself across on the pulley. The other guy would be pulling it on his end. Get the guy to the other side. Now you have one guy on either side. You put a backpack, strap it in the chair, haul it across. Keep doing it until the gear is across.
Right.
The last guy gets in the chair, and the two guys they pull each other until he gets across.
I didn't even think of your gear. Like I hadn't even, I was just picturing the gourd in my mind. But you're right. You've got your backpack.
I got a huge backpack. I got 10 days of food there, and all my gear, all my clothing, everything.
Yeah.
And it was heavy because I'm alone. There's no way to share the weight with other people. So now I have to get across, me and the gear at the same time. And I looked at it and I looked at it and I was thinking bad thoughts.
Yeah.
And but I had enough experience to say to myself, don't panic. It's a situation you have to face, and theoretically it's possible to get across, but you're going to have to do it. And it was getting cold, it was getting dark, there was no place to camp.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to camp on that side anyway because I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing that I'd had this thing the next day to cross. So I got myself together, and the plan was for me to sit in this rickety old chair and to strap my backpack so it was hanging underneath the chair.
Okay.
And worried that should the rope that's attaching it come apart, should the pack be too heavy and it falls down into the water, then all my food is gone, my shelter's gone, my clothing's gone. I'm there. It's just me.
Right.
And a bag of peanuts that I got in my pocket, for the rest of the trip. And so I get in the chair, and as I push it out from the side there, it was easy because it was going kind of on a downward slant towards the middle of the gorge. And I'm going, okay, this is fine. And although I could hear the sound of the water, it was rushing through. It was really something. And then, but in the middle, now it got so foggy that I couldn't see either side anymore.
Oh man, you're just
all I see is I look one way or the other, and it's just a cable disappearing into the mist.
Gosh.
Not only that, but the second half, going from the middle to the far end, is now going back uphill, if you will, going in
right
because of the sagging cable, and it got harder and harder to grasp the cable and pull myself across. I could feel my fingers are starting to get really, really cold. If I let up just a little, the whole chair would start sliding back to the middle.
Right.
And so I'm struggling to keep it steady and to keep it moving slowly uphill, hoping that sooner or later I'm going to see the end of where this cable is bolted into the rock on the far side. And sure enough, when I finally saw it, I was, maybe 10 feet away, 15 feet. And the burst of adrenaline,
right.
I was able to push my way through. But then I had a problem getting off the chair because I was afraid that it would either slide back down or that when I tried to grab and untie my pack, that it would slip and fall down into the water, or I would. But, I took my time, and sooner or later, I was safe on the other side. And what was good about it, the payoff for me that day was that on the other side, close by was another one of those little shelters that was there. And I would be able to just get there, get inside, spend the night. I wouldn't have to spend the night in my tent.
Yeah.
I could, kick back in there and it would be warmer and I'd be out of the wind and whatever.
You must have been exhausted too, even just from the adrenaline and yeah.
I was emotionally, physically, mentally, intellectually, any way that you can be exhausted, I was exhausted.
Yeah.
But, at the same time, I was able to look back and say, okay, but you didn't lose it. You didn't, you kept your cool. You didn't panic. You figured out, the best possible way of doing it, what the safest way of doing would be. I realized that I had done the right thing in terms of how to deal with that situation, and that night was the best freeze dried meal I ever ate in my life because I was so happy to be eating it.
Isn't that something about traveling out in the wilderness that after a really hard day or an event like that, the food just changes, right?
Telling you, I'll be honest, man. I Every once in a while I would eat some of that stuff here at home, and I go, oh man, this is not this doesn't taste all that great. But when I'm out there in the middle of nowhere, on a day like that, I mean, not only is it good, and they pack these freeze dried meals for two people in one meal.
Oh,
So I eat the whole thing, and then I lick my plate, so I get every single morsel. I lick it so clean I don't even have to wash it.
your body wants those calories for sure.
Let me tell you, man.
You mentioned how diligent you are before a trip, how much you love the planning phase, and you get to a situation like that, and do you say to yourself, like, how did I not catch this, or how did I not rank this higher on the risk level, that kind of stuff?
Well, I did know from the planning
Yeah.
that it was there. I knew that when I got there, it was going to be a cable crossing, and that I would have to negotiate it. But I didn't know it was going to be like that. I mean, here again, if I had been with somebody, it wouldn't have been that big a deal. I'm not going to lie. It would, still would have been.
It still sounds scary to me.
Sort of
So yeah,
your attention,
when you're in the middle and you can't see either side,
and it's just you. And then I was thinking that, whenever you hear an incident where somebody went out into the wilderness and was never seen again, I know from experience that what that means is they probably fell into water, because otherwise you would find a tent, you would find some remnants of the person. But, on a river crossing or crossing water like this, if you fall in and you get washed down, nobody might ever know what happened to you.
right.
And so, I anticipated it. I knew that it was coming.
Yeah.
I didn't know it was going to be like that. And then that plus the amount of concern and fear from the previous days with the polar bear and the quicksand and the weather. I didn't even get into the crazy weather, winter weather. But on the flip side, after I made it and I got to the little shack there, and I decided to spend a day there the next day without, just to kind of calm down and reset and so forth. But during that day, I walked back to the gorge to look at it from the perspective of being on the right side of it now,
Right.
and to think about what I had gone through and what was going through my mind, and to come to terms with fear and how I deal with it, and fear and how it should be dealt with, and what I learned from that whole episode, which only took maybe a half hour from start to finish. But there was a learning component to that experience, and I wanted to soak it in and make sure that it was something that in learning it, is something that I could use perhaps in the future if I ever get into a tough situation again.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't panic, and that I would handle it the right way, and that I would be open to learning what it means to be afraid and how to handle fear. And in fact, right now I have a lecture that I do on fear.
Oh,
And
really?
It's called Fear and the Art of Being Afraid. because I figured if you're going to be afraid, you may as well do it the right way, you know. And so I have this talk that I do, incorporating, you know, all I've learned from all the years that I've been scared.
I want to be a student there. I think it's really important. You know, from my experience, no matter how much you plan, you're gonna run into something.
Definitely,
So
definitely.
it is
That's
important
the
to
definition
understand.
of adventure. You
Yeah,
know, adventure means that you don't, you can plan, you know, day and night forever, and then you go out and do it, and something may happen that you hadn't anticipated, or that it happens in a way that you didn't anticipate it happening. Uh, that's the drama. That's the enticement. You know, for me, it's the adventure of it, of knowing that, hey, you know, something may happen when you need to lean back and depend on your experience, and depend on your fitness, and depend on your state of mind to get you through it. And I can tell you that an incident like that, when you get home, you still have that benefit. You still have that learning, even though there's no gorges I have to cross here in New York City. You know, I mean, when something happens that's challenging to you, and you can say, yeah, well, but you can do that, man. You know, you walked across Greenland. You know, you sat in a chair in Baffin Island. You got across the gorge. You know,
yeah,
uh, so it stays with you. You know, it has an impact that's potentially very beneficial.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. I mean, we all face challenges, so why not develop a little thicker skin, I guess, if it's through situations like that. Um, you've made it to the other side. You've taken a rest day. Uh, take us out.
So from there to the end, because Summit Lake is at the highest part of the route, theoretically, it's all downhill, you know, to the other side. And you know, in terms of its topographic map, you know, it is downhill. Um, and there was actually a trail on the far side there,
Ooh, fancy.
which wasn't in the initial part of the route that I took, because most people start from the place I was heading to. That's usually the start point for most people. It's called Pagnerton
Okay.
or Pang, and most people fly into Pang, and they walk up to Summit Lake, and then they turn around and they come back. So they never cross the gorge or anything like that.
Right.
They walk up to that little shack where I was staying. There's a campsite there, and it's at the highest point, so you can see beautiful glaciers, beautiful mountains. Baffin Island is a fantastically beautiful place,
Yeah.
and so they just do an up and back for a day or two. And so now that I'm on that trail and I'm ending my hike there, the trail going back was pretty easy compared to what I had been through already. But the scenery, the fjords, the glaciers, the moraines made by the glaciers,
Yeah.
absolutely spectacular. And then, you know, kind of at the, you know, just to wrap the whole thing up at the end, you know, you just before you get to the end of the trail, you come to a rock. They call them a Inukshuk
Yeah.
marker,
Yeah.
and on there is a sign that says you are standing on the Arctic Circle. And, you know, so you actually get to cross the Arctic Circle. Now, I was north of the Arctic Circle, walking south, crossing back down,
Right.
but it was really cool to get to this sign in three languages: English, French, and Inuktitut, the native language.
Yeah.
It says the Arctic Circle, and that was cool.
That is really cool. On the other side, did you get to spend any time in that village as well when you made it across?
I did, yeah. So in Pangton, which is a bigger town, I think it had like 1,200 people there when I was there, and a big Hudson's Bay store, and park headquarters is there, and so I spent a couple of days there as well. And one thing I remember in particular, one evening I I went to this. It's like a little restaurant um, place where you can eat in a rooming house there.
Right.
And I met a woman, um, an indigenous woman who was traveling to the remote uh, locations around Baffin Island. They were all on the coast. There's nobody lives in the interior.
Mm-hmm.
And she was interested. She was a student, a PhD student at the university in Iqaluit.
Hmm.
And she was specializing into soapstone carving that was done by women and how skillful they are. I mean, men usually do most of the carving,
Gotcha.
but she was going and she was tracking women and interviewing them, and she had a video camera that she was taking, and she was telling me about the history of soapstone carving, and specifically carving that's done by women because women do different subjects than men. Uh, and it was a fascinating meal we had, and she was telling me about she doesn't go um, trekking from one side to the other. I mean, she goes mostly by boat because, as I say, most of the settlements are on the coast.
Yeah.
But it was, we spend a lot of time talking about um, learning and visiting people who living different lifestyles than we are.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was really a fascinating meal there and a fascinating experience too.
Interesting. It seems like you accomplished all the goals that you set out to, right? Like,
I did.
yeah.
I was very happy with that trip. When I came home, I was totally thrilled. Um, especially you develop all your photos. Now I'm saying develop because back in the day there
Yeah.
was no digital camera. I had to bring a Ziploc bag full of film, rolls of film,
Yeah.
do everything I could to make sure they didn't get wet or that they didn't get lost or damaged or anything like
Fall
that,
into a gorge or something. Yeah.
or to a gorge or anything like that. But then when you get home, it's not like you can look at the photo. I mean, you have to then take the photos to a place and have them developed, and wait until 2 days later or whatever until they can. You're dying to see what the photos look like. That was a great trip. I got everything and more out of that trip than I wanted. In terms of learning, in terms of adventure, in terms of self knowledge, because what you learn on a trip like this, the biggest learning you get is learning about yourself and learning how you make decisions and learning how you deal with adversity. These are things that help you all your life. And so yeah, this particular trip, it was good. But I'm going to tell you, man, I'm still a sucker for anything that says don't come here unless you really know what you're doing.
Well, I bet. I mean, at this
I
point,
love the adventure.
at this point, you're the right person to take on those challenges, though. Definitely have the experience for it. Well, I I don't know. I read your book and now getting to listen to you, talk in more detail about one of the stories. I'm super motivated. I'll tell you, my being Canadian, my grandmother, she passed in her 90s, but in those years, she told me several times the Arctic is her favorite place in the world.
Yes.
And every time, because I've traveled a lot, and she, when are you going to the Arctic? When are you going to go up there? And I'd be like, oh, I was thinking about going to Anchorage. And then she'd sort of snap back. That's not the Arctic. You got to go further. You got to go further up there. I'm like, okay, I'll get there. So I'm gonna get there soon, but I am extremely motivated to just get out there. And
let me add my thoughts to your grandmother's thoughts.
Yeah.
Get out there. I have been north of the Arctic Circle like 15 times.
Yeah.
I've been to northern Sweden, Lapland, northern Finland. I've been in I've been in Greenland above the Arctic Circle. I've been to Gates of the Arctic in Alaska like 3 times. Baffin Island. And yeah, there's no place like it. There's no place like it in the world. And not only would I urge you to go there, but to be honest, I would urge you to go there soon because the earth is getting warmer and climate change is wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
On the Arctic in particular, which is warming up faster than other places. I've talked to people living up there who used to be subsistence people who could live off the land, and now they're finding that there aren't as many fish or seals or whales in the water. There's not as much game, caribou, and whatever they're looking for on the lands. The permafrost is melting, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to see it and you want to appreciate it, don't wait too long.
It's good advice. It is kind of sad as well. I mean, yes. When was the first time you went to the Arctic? Like how many years ago?
1960. Well, I went 66 back in the Stone Age. I drove from New York City in my Volkswagen up to Fairbanks, Alaska.
Right. I remember that one from the book. Yeah.
Now that one ended just below the Arctic Circle in Circle, Alaska. They called it Circle, Alaska. It was named Circle, Alaska because I used to think it was on the Arctic Circle, but it really was a few miles south of it.
We definitely need more people with living memory like yourself. Speaking about, you've seen it over the years, the change. So I will take that to heart. Push that up my list.
And then write a book about it. And then I'll interview you.
I would love that. Something tells me you're pretty good at it. So
I can ask a question. I'm curious enough to.
Yeah, exactly.
People.
JR, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story, sharing your experiences, and a bigger thank you for just doing it more generally. I think you motivated me. I'm sure you're motivating lots of other people to appreciate nature and push their limits a little bit. And as you said, get out there.
Well, thanks a lot for the invitation and the invite to do this. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, if I, can influence somebody in a positive way to experience nature and all the benefits that come with being out there, then yeah, I'm happy to do that. It's an important thing to do, not only for your own growth, but if you go out there and you see what it's like and you realize what's happening out there, then you become a steward. You'll become someone who cares about your planet, about our home, and ideally you will support efforts to keep it sustainable for our kids and our grandkids.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, JR.
All right, my man. Have a good one.
You too. A big thank you to JR for coming on the podcast and sharing one of his stories. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more, definitely check out his book, Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker, or check out his website, jrinthewilderness.com. Also, if you have an amazing travel story you'd like to tell, please find me at oneofftravelstories.com.